You know, I still, I have to say, I have some problems with this film, no? And the main one of it is the kind of the ease by which you make the line. And I think that the gesture of walking, the fact that there is no resistance, the fact that a line could be created, could be kind of reified from a concept into, you know, back into reality, doesn't really register the complexities of this conflict. And I think essentially what you were doing, you were perhaps inadvertently, you were accepting by your path several concepts, several kind of borders that, for example, you are starting at the point of the Jerusalem municipality, which is a highly manipulative border. The Jerusalem municipal borders were actually set officially a few days after, or 2 weeks after the occupation, as the first sort of clear act of annexation. Right? These are not natural borders. They are not the borders of the city in urban terms, and not the borders of the city in historical terms. They are the borders of Israeli colonization of it, that were actually drawn in a very manipulative manner to keep as many Palestinians out of the expanded municipal borders and as much open space for Jewish expansion in it. Right? So by actually drawing that, you accept that as being Jerusalem, whereas I think that the definition of what Jerusalem is are the actually most questionable political and most complex and most difficult political question. Because you have many borders there. You have the borders of the kind of the urban area, or which is very kind of blurred, you know, it is never a line. You have the border of kind of the historical narratives that are around Jerusalem. You have the borders of the mandatory city, meaning the British Mandate area. You have the border of the Jordanian town. You have the border of the Israeli pre-67 line. You have and then you have now the expanded borders, which are still being expanded. The green line is never a line. I mean, it is a line in some places, in some other places it's a loop. In other places it runs around itself. And I think that the fact that there is this paradox, that the green line is never a line, that there is not a kind of a line, a gesture, that was ever able to separate Jewish geography from Palestinian demography of geography, is somehow a very crucial point. Because it means that there are no possibility for kind of for two states to happen side by side. If you are mentioning the 1947 partition plan, sort of as a result of the 181 UN resolution, you would see that it has two very interesting points in it. And these are points where the borders of Israel and Palestine actually cross. There are two of them. They're called the kissing points. The kissing points are basically kind of an X, where the borders of Israel and Palestine, where the border is no longer a line, but becomes a point. From a one-dimensional entity, it becomes a non-dimensional coordinate, right? It becomes a point. And at these points are embodied the whole paradox of the occupation and the attempts to draw lines. And the commission that was drawing that partition plan had two things in mind. First, that the reduction of the border from a one-dimensional to a coordinated point necessitate the break of space from a two-dimensional surface into a volume. Meaning, the way to actually work it out spatially is tunnel over bridge. Israel would tunnel, would connect, and the Palestinian would have a bridge over it, and vice versa. Meaning, the collapse of space into, again, from one dimension to zero dimension necessitated the three dimension for the first time, and embodies that contradiction. Because now, in Jerusalem, there are many of those kissing points where the population of Israel and Palestine are not contiguous to each other, but are actually discontiguous. Again, that kind of moment of slippage, that moment of contradiction in the logic of the line are for me the most interesting moments, right? Because they embody, even if it is one point of contradiction, it embodied the inability of a line to offer sort of a geographical formal resolution. And I think that the facility and the ease within which you have seemingly offered to repartition Jerusalem according to a very arbitrary line, which is a kind of a line of ceasefire, a line of exhaustion of soldiers, it is rendering somehow a little service in the understanding of urban geography and as well the geography of the conflict. Yeah, I like very much the fact that you use the city as a canvas to draw on it. I like very much the quality of the line that you draw, because when you look, if you take seriously the stain itself, the smear of paint itself, you would see that in your paint, and I've seen it in several moments within your film, you have splotches and you have loops and you have breaks in it, and you have the texture of the paint, the liquidity of the paint interact with the texture of the ground in much more interesting way than the kind of the facile gesture of just walking, but that can teach you something on the larger scale, on the overlap of kind of abstract geometry of border making with the reality conditions of a city, which are registered very much by the texture of the ground, right? Whereas when you go, and I think it's quite clear in Palestinian or in sort of uninhabited areas, you're walking through dust in a way that feels that the line is going to just disappear very, very quickly, or you're going through a kind of a very rough road, and that fragments the line. And I think there is a kind of a whole texture in kind of understanding Jerusalem in its first centimeter. The first 15 or 15 millimeter of the city registering some kind of political seismograph in it, which are very interesting. But I think that treating Jerusalem as a surface loses a lot of the complexity of it, whereas so much of the conflict is actually based on the idea of the volume, right? You flatten the city into a canvas, you turn it into a map, right? A map, by definition, is a two-dimensional abstraction of a three-dimensional topography, right? And in a sense, what you do is a one-to-one map, no? I mean, you abstract the city in that respect. But I think that in one of the first kind of moments in the film,